Welcome to the Pet Parenting Reset podcast. If you're new here, my name is Jess, and this is a space where we talk about all things health span and quality of life for your pets and you too. I'm so excited that you're here. Let's dive in. Think of how to start this. You've been here so many times. Do you want to introduce the show?
Well, you are the host, so
No, okay. All right, welcome back, pet parent. Today's episode is actually, I'm learning right along with you. So Billy reached out and he said, hey, we have some really cool new information that we put together and I want to talk about it. And I said, sure. So I know we're talking about the new probiotics, but that's about all I know that we're talking about. So I'm just going to let you take it away.
well, yeah, I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's an interesting thing that we so when you do something like this, so when you have something that is a completely new concept, and something, we're very proud of doing things like that generally. But when you do something that's never been done before, there's associated like vagueness with it. So you have these instances where you're like, okay, and I'll go over this, but this is the concept, this is what we're doing. And then you move to, oh, we can see that it's having these health benefits in pets. And that information should not be downplayed at all. I talk about that a lot with people who are like, go to their vet. They go, oh, hey, I started doing this diet and everything, all these issues sort of subsided. And they're like, well, there's no scientific study to prove that. Well, so what? I can physically see it. And my dog has a higher quality of life now. And I think that's where like a lot of the disconnect happens, between, some of the conventional. So that information is always really great. Like a really great example of that is our wild fermented mushroom probiotic. People all over the country since its inception have been telling us that it helps tear stains. And that is totally great. And I have no idea why. There's people, I might have theories. There's people who have theories, Rita Hogan, etc. But the real kicker there is the result that I'm happy about. So those things are great. And we've been seeing this in the results. But one of the things we always try to do is we always try to get as much data as possible. And this was a really interesting way to get clinical research done so we could actually prove some factors of this. And one of the reasons that we chose Innovative Pet Labs was because what they're measuring is like quality of life factors. Like we love, bacteria in general and, measuring like the good versus bad bacteria makeup in the gut and that kind of stuff. But sometimes for people too, that's kind of like a abstract concept. Okay, cool. So my dog is going to have more good bacteria, but what does that mean? In terms of like, what do I actually physically see? Because that's what we really want, right? Like when you take your turmeric every day, that's great that you can list off all these health benefits, but what you're really looking for is for your joints not to hurt, And so it's a way to do that. But for those of the people who don't know what I'm talking about with our probiotics, we have 3 of them. We have farm, leaf, and soil. And when we made those probiotics, the whole concept was we knew that traditionally made probiotics have like a limited number of strains. And we knew that fermented foods have hundreds and thousands of strains that we don't even know how to measure, which is one of the reasons that there's a plus on all those. So it's kind of funny because our mind still wants to wrap around, oh, there's this many. So like Leaf says different strains of healthy yeast and bacteria, 300 plus. So people immediately go, oh, there's 300. No, there's more than we can measure. And the whole point is to bring out the food culture, the entire culture, and not the actual strains themselves. We're not isolating the strains. We're not identifying them and going, okay, we have this much of this. And also they'll vary every time because they grow out that food culture every time. So we wanted to we have fermented products, but we know that there's tons of animals that can't do fermented foods. We know there's animals that, can't do certain foods, dairy, etc. And so when we looked at that, we said, how do we take all the multitude of those bacteria and put them somewhere else? And we found a really cool lab in Canada who's able to do that for us. And so, we took fermented raw milk, we took kombucha and we took wild fermented plants and we grew out the entire culture. And so, one of the things I don't talk about a lot is in farm and leaf, the one that has uh, both yeast and bacteria. The lab actually grew them out separately, the species. So they put one in a plate that is conducive to yeast and one in a plate that's conducive to bacteria. And so there's equal amounts of yeast and bacteria in both of those, which is one of the reasons I think it has such a leaf, for example, has such a profound effect on yeast issues, even more than foods that contain good and high amounts of yeast or a single strain of yeast. In fact, and by the way, this is all like total tangents because we're talking about soil here. But I just had someone tell me when I did some events in California recently, and I just had someone tell me that they had tried every yeast for yeasty years. They tried every yeast protocol, supplement, product, low carb diet. Nothing ever worked for this lab. And within a week and a half on leaf, the years were completely cleared.
That's
And so
awesome.
that's like medicine. That's like
Yeah.
medicine level,
Mm.
because we always talk about like when you work with your clients, it's a process. You
Yeah.
got to give these things time, right, in order to do that. And so that's really the concept of all of these probiotics is like how do we bring nature how do we bring the native bacteria that animals evolved with back into the bowl? And because
Mhm.
at one point, cats and dogs were constantly inoculated with, um, you know, all this bacteria consistently when they slept outside, when they lived in the forest, when they, were eating off the ground and that kind of thing. It sort of goes back to there's research right now going into the Amish because they don't have allergies, but we don't need research. I know exactly why they don't have allergies, and it's because you know, those kids are barefoot all summer and they're in manure up to their, ankles and they're just living outside constantly. In fact, I was on an Amish farm recently and all the like 10 kids were just playing outside. And I was like, oh my God, it's like how kids are supposed to be. And so it really does bring that concept back. And I think that's where you're going to see, when we talk about the research here, I think that's where you're going to see a lot of the data go because we really wanted to take this like huge concept and boil it down to some real quality of life factors because you would expect all of these different health markers to change if you're constantly inoculating the gut with all these different bacteria. So it is we wanted to prove the diversity versus potency.
Okay. Well, and I want to kind of frame this a little bit because one of the topics of conversation that I have been having and researching a lot lately is around probiotics in general. And I think it's something that some people are starting to talk about in a very different way because one, I am not anti capitalism at all, but we do live in a very consumeristic society. And what happens when something takes off, everybody starts making it, everybody starts putting it in their products. And that's what we're seeing with probiotics right now. They're in so many pet products. And it's like, okay, but if you're getting the same three strains in 10 different products that you're using throughout the month or the quarter, then are you actually doing more damage than good when you're only exposing your pet to the same strains over and over and over again? So I think that is where farm leaf and soil are so different from everything else that's on the market.
Yeah. Well, and then you couple that with the fact that, under AFCO guidelines, there's only certain bacteria that are actually allowed in food and feed products. So it's a little bit better and more the Wild West when it comes to supplements and that kind of stuff. You can do more interesting things, but you have this small list of like studied probiotics. But I would posit that like I did this in a presentation once. I was talking about multiple bacteria in fermented foods, and I said I was like, here's a bacteria, and I kind of like played the audience in this, but I listed this bacteria and I said, here's all the things that this bacteria does. And it was this long list of like, helps glutathione pathways and, creates this vitamin and does all these different things. And uh, so immediately I saw everybody's head like go down and they're writing down this bacteria. Like their immediate thought was, I got to get this bacteria. But my point was, don't focus on that bacteria. Every bacteria is going to have a list like that of, that's a beneficial bacteria. So when I was positing that we need to essentially focus on getting as many of those good bacteria as possible because they're all doing things that we don't even understand yet. And so that's where you kind of revert back to um, the model from nature. But you can't just leave it there because just saying something is good because it's natural is a logical fallacy. So we can't leave it there. So that's why we do interesting stuff like, and if you're listening to this, I'm holding up a piece of paper, which I never do. I never have reference material, but this is new enough where like I couldn't just recall all this from memory.
Yeah.
So don't
Well,
blame me.
that's
I've been on here a
okay
lot of times.
because I actually just started putting the video on Spotify so people can see it. So
Oh, got it.
we're
Well, and
good.
I will tell you, I was going to send this to you previously, but we haven't got the final version from the lab yet, and there is like some spelling errors and stuff in it. So I was like, I'm gonna wait on that, to be able to do that. So, and it is a good moment to shout out, we're doing a lot more with our vet program this year. And next week, I'm actually sending all this research and some sample probiotics to all of the 180 plus vets in our.
That's
So
awesome.
that will be. And by the way, Green Juju is small enough to where it's literally me driving up to the plant and sending out, over 100 boxes via the U.S. mail. The one that we did the clinical research on was soil. And soil is derived from Bailey's blend. So all the probiotics here come from cilantro, broccoli, green cabbage, everything that's in uh, Bailey's blend. And, this was just created in my kitchen. I took Bailey's blend and added salt to it to intensify the ferment and lower the pH faster and uh, fermented it for I don't know if it's 3 days or a week, I can't remember, but I fermented it until the pH was about 3.5, because I knew that's kind of the sweet spot there. And then I sent it to the lab, and they, did their thing. The only one I had problems with was the raw milk sample. It's hard to get raw milk across the Canadian border, so eventually I just took raw off of it, and they accepted the sample, so that was good for me.
By the way,
So,
I have I have soil in my tea right now.
yeah.
Just throw that out there.
That's one of those things. I like every day um in Mabel's water. Mabel, my daughter, for those who aren't don't know about my life, which I don't know why you would, but um so every day I put like fiber and soil and whatnot in her water because she can't like taste them. And so it's my kind of way to like when you have a 4-year-old, you gotta do everything you can because they start to get she's not as picky as most kids, but she is getting that way. So that is interesting. So, going to this research. So, IPL measures specific factors in relation to the gut. And the ones I want to talk about today are in relation to the ability for the body to deal with toxins, gut diversity, and mostly, and also inflammation. Because we talk about a lot, everything starts in the gut and
Hmm.
inflammation and how the gut communicates with everything, just generally. And so that's what I like about this is we've seen so many animals that have gotten better with baseline conditions, um, just generally, in that from our like anecdotal evidence. But this kind of like, um, so the first thing, so there was several factors to this. So there's a testing factor, and then there's a sort of reporting factor. And so the testing factor is a little bit different. That has to do with, finite data, and the reporting data has to do with what people are actually seeing in this. So there's 47 dogs, which is a great sample size. Especially we shot for 50, and to get 47 to actually do all of this and make this work. Shout out to IPL because they're really, really great to work with. I would highly recommend doing just their test in general. But they sort of streamlined the process for everything. So that was a really great thing. So the thing that they looked at in the symptom sort of reduction or the symptoms in general is frequent infections, panting, flatulence, constipation. lethargy, excessive hunger, excessive licking, skin and coat issues, GI, which included vomiting and diarrhea, and then anxiety, which I thought was an interesting one, just general. And there will be some interesting data later about size of dogs, which I thought was pretty funny in relation to their like symptoms. So the first one to look at was frequent infections. Those that reported frequent infections, the overall improvement in the 2 months was by 91%. So
Wow.
basically, all the dogs that reported frequent infections basically went down to it. It essentially cleared up all of those. By the way, I can't. Are you frozen or am I?
I am good, so maybe it's just on your end. Can you hear me at all, or is it just the screen that's frozen? Is that better? Can you hear me? I'm gonna go with no. Better? Yeah, you're good. I mean, I could hear and see you the whole time, so I think we're fine.
Oh, you were frozen. So I
Okay.
apologize. I just didn't want to. I just didn't want to keep rambling on, and we couldn't use it.
No, you're good. I will pause though, since we had this little snafu, that all three of the Green Juju probiotics and the Innovative Pet Lab testing are available at Wild Wellness Pets. So go there and buy them.
Oh, there you go. Yes, absolutely. So that is a great pause. So, so anyway, so going back to what I was talking about in terms of the reporting. So they saw a 91% improvement in frequent infections, which is really great, an 84% reduction in panting, 75% reduction in flatulence, 74% reduction in constipation. That's what with both of those, that's what I've really noticed from our own work with the probiotic with soil and also our own work with and also people's reporting is that stool consistency just becomes completely consistent over time. After even just like a week of using it. 68% reduction in lethargy, 58% in excessive hunger, 57% in excessive licking. That's a big one. We know, everyone hates when their dog licks their paws. It's like the other day, Huckleberry licked his paws, and Maple was like, "Huck, stop licking your paws immediately." So, like, it's one of those things where a 57% reduction is really great. A 51% reduction in skin and coat issues, and for 2 months without a diet change. And I should mention as well, this is a range of diets: kibble fed dogs, raw fed dogs, just all over the board. 47% reduction in vomiting and diarrhea, which is also great because we know that, you've probably worked with so many people that just can't find that right diet as far as getting, something where they're not having diarrhea a few times a week or whatever it might be. Um, and then anxiety, we saw 20%, 26% reduction, which is really
Dang.
cool as well, which we know that the gut makeup and gut lining and gut health, has a strong connection to the brain and, overall wellness. But also, I think some of that's connected to dogs just not feeling great and
Hmm.
having more anxiety just in general. So, um, and we'll go back to those results in just in general. Um, and I really want to focus on sort of two of these things that we're measuring. The first one of those is beta glucuronidase. Beta glucuronidase is a really interesting, it's really real with this packet here. Beta glucuronidase is an interesting one because what it is, it's in all mammals and its very negative impact comes from the fact that it essentially takes things that the liver is trying to remove from the body, i.e., toxins and hormones, things like that, and redistribute and basically stops that second phase of detoxification and puts those things back into circulation. So puts them back in the gut and then they go back in the body. So it stops the phase two detoxification of the liver, which is a big, huge deal
Yeah,
because
it is.
the people on the conventional side are like, "Oh, you don't need supplements, you have a liver." But, like, if your liver is working and then you have all this buildup of bad bacteria that is providing the substance that's putting it back in the body, that doesn't really you're just gonna run through that cycle, consistently, and I think that deals with a lot of health issues.
Hmm.
Did you have something to say there? I didn't know if you
No, I mean, I'm thinking a lot about different situations and different like dogs that I have worked with, and it detoxification is difficult. It's a difficult thing to more difficult to pinpoint in dogs than humans, just with like the testing that we have available. But it with if the detox pathways aren't open, then like that work has to be done before anything else we do. Um, because you're going to get that backup of toxins in the body, and it can create all kinds of effects, including mental effects, because it's going to affect your brain at some point and make you foggy. Maybe I think some behavior problems, even like anger and aggression, and it's difficult because a lot of people, when dogs are having like aggression issues, like their first line of defense is probably punishment, but then I need a dog trainer because we need to figure this out. When I think our first line of defense should always be like, how healthy is your animal, and then we can look at training. So yeah, it's just got my brain going.
It's very similar to like diet in that you start with food and then go to supplementation, if you need it, just generally. So it's and that in the beta glucuronidase, this is actually where we saw, my opinion, really the coolest effect of this entire thing. So the first thing is, if you look at the starting point, you had 33 dogs. So keep in mind this was a 47 dog clinical research trial. So you had 33 dogs that were in the normal range. You had 9 that were borderline for being high in this, and then you had 5 that were actually high. So when the study ended after 2 months, you had 46 that were in the normal range. You had 0 that were borderline and only 1 that was high. So basically every dog went into the normal range when it came to this beta glucuronidase, which really speaks to the fact that there was more diversification of bacteria because you don't have this overwhelming buildup of bacteria that are making this beta glucuronidase. And also, um, I just lost my train of thought. That's awesome. So that happens to me. Um,
That's
oh, and,
okay.
and that the body is able to deal with toxins better. And this was, by the way, the greatest. Where was so the total reduction average for beta glucuronidase for all the dogs in the study was just over 55%. So a 55% reduction in beta glucuronidase, which is an incredible reduction. So if you can say, hey, this marker that tests for uh, gut diversity, ability to, expel toxins from the body, improved by 55% or went down by 55%, those bacteria, however you want to look at it. That's an incredible thing. And that's only in 2 months. So that for me, that's a whole body health marker that we look at and we go, oh, okay, this is a very interesting findings. Of the 47 by the way, some of the stuff I'm going to read is from the lab specifically, is from the group that analyzes all this data. So 70% of the dogs started at baseline in the normal range and 98% finished in the normal range. So basically fixed every dog's ranges. And 25% of the dogs had high or borderline at baseline, and all but one went into normal range. So, and that's just in 2 months of not even switching anything with the diet, anything like that, just adding soil as well. Um, so the lab noted that the most consistent improvement was a reduction of beta glucuronidase levels, and that this correlated strongly with the reduction of physical symptoms like thirst, hunger, and diarrhea. So what they noticed was when you look at the reporting factor, the symptoms that were associated with high levels of beta glucuronidase were thirst, hunger, and diarrhea. We all deal with that in our dogs. And so that was a really interesting thing. And again, that goes back to, okay, I just gave you this overarching concept of this is what's happening in the gut, but how does that actually work in the real world? And that was how that actually worked. The people who ran the study said Green Juju likely increased the commensal bacteria, which reduced the opportunistic bacteria that make beta glucuronidase, which is interesting because commensal bacteria are those that are there that live in the gut. And I talk a lot about probiotic bacteria typically are those that don't stay around very often. The probiotics that you take, they stay around for like a couple days or a day and they do their work and then they're out of the system. But you have this commensal bacteria. So what this showed was that uh, soil supports commensal bacteria, whether that means that the bacteria that are in soil are actually taking up in the gut permanently, or whether they're supporting the ones that are in the gut. We know that uh, the commensal bacteria is getting increased there. So just a general higher bacteria for that. Um, that is a really interesting. I don't know how to end these ever. I'm always like, so that's interesting. Um, but for
Well, it
nerds
is
like
interesting.
myself, I think it's very interesting. So now we move to calprotectin, which is another substance that. So calprotectin, when you measure it, it is essentially associated with or a byproduct of uh, the when the body releases. Why can I not think right now? This is definitely a Friday. I don't know what. Like I had my 4-year-old this morning had a very strong. She was very strong-willed, and maybe I'm still reeling from that, but got it. Okay, I got it. So anyway, calprotectin is basically the byproduct of when the gut releases white blood cells in order to fight inflammation in the gut. So you can measure this calprotectin by going, uh, and you can essentially measure like how much the body's trying to fight inflammation in the gut. And so when you look at the calprotectin levels in the dogs, so at the start of the trial, 29 of the dogs were in normal range, 9 were in borderline, and 9 were high. So at the end of the trial, 45 were in normal range, 1 was high, and 1 was borderline. That's where you look at what's considered a normal amount of, you know, the body fighting inflammation in the gut. So that speaks to a total reduction of inflammation in the gut. So now you pair those, you start to like stack these things on top of each other, so you start to go, okay, so it's going to help your dog deal with toxins. It's going to help increase commensal bacteria. It's going to help diversify bacteria. And now we can say that we also know that it also reduces inflammation in the gut. Now, so those are all into normal ranges. So then you have to talk about um, what what were the like percentage factors that we were looking at. So the number of pets with calprotectin in the normal range, the total increase was 47% from 29 originally, as I mentioned, to 45% out of the 47 that were tested. So the interesting thing about this was there was one extreme outlier removed here, and it's because the dog had a parasite, which threw off its levels everywhere. So we actually have
Yeah.
the data with that dog, and we have the data without the dog because that's not really a fair assessment of what was happening. But it's kind of
Mhm.
cool because we have that data as well. Um,
So
but
the dog, they didn't know that the dog had the parasite going into the study.
yeah, hmm
Oh,
and they figured it out during it. So that
yeah.
was an interesting.
Yeah, I bet.
Of those, so when you look at all the dogs minus that one dog, the mean for the reduction in calprotectin was 28%, which I think is a really significant number. So not only did all the dogs go into normal range uh, when it comes to just inflammation in general or how the body's fighting inflammation, but that the average amount that went down was 28%, which is I think really significant after 2 months to be able to say, look, we're reducing inflammation essentially 28% in 2 months. And so this is again where it goes back to the whole body health. So the report also says Green Juju resulted in reduced intestinal inflammation in the final testing to baseline in over half the dogs. Some of those dogs started out as normal and maintained normal, and in at least 50% of the dogs, all of those went down. Even in dogs where inflammation rose slightly, 91% of them still saw a decrease in beta glucuronidase. This suggests the supplement works most consistently on the metabolic microbial level, even if localized inflammation takes longer to subside. So even if the dog's calprotectin went up, their beta glucuronidase went down, which also suggests that if you did the supplement longer, you would see a reduction in that just generally. And we do have questions about that. What would happen if we did it for a year? There's a lot of things around that just generally. So that is something to consider. So that was a really interesting thing um, to look at. And by the way, for the sake of time, I'm going over the most interesting things to me.
Well, let me
But I
ask
will
you really
say, what's on?
quickly. Let me ask you really quickly, and this is aside from the study, obviously. You said, okay, what would happen if I gave this every day for a year? Do you actually recommend that, or would you recommend rotating throughout the year between the three?
I would still recommend rotating. I think that we see these results, and I think you would see similar, at least in like efficacy, you'd see similar results. Those probiotics are going to do different things because they're totally different cultures, but I think that you'll see different results. And I do think there's value in having thousands of bacteria, which you'll get if you rotate between the three versus just the perhaps hundreds, right, that are in soil. But yeah, usually we say start with soil and then rotate through them. Or like if your dog is, dealing with allergies and you're doing it in support of that, then do it for until those things subside and then rotate through them. Or like if you're like me, your dog has a lot of, I use every day, I use soil, but I rotate between the other two. So like Monday would be soil and farm, Tuesday would be soil and leaf. And then I'm also using, you know, the wild fermented mushroom probiotic in his rehydration of his food. I feed him raw milk every day. So he's getting a huge subset. Like I'm trying to diversify his microbiome with as much bacteria as possible, which has essentially fixed every issue he ever had with any allergies, gut sensitivity to foods, everything. I mean, he's like baseline. The only thing I have to do on the supplement range just to top off that 5% of, the allergies he used to get, and I only do it, 4 months out of the year is PEA. And that stuff works for those that are I actually got my mom to do that and got her dog off Apoquil. So,
Oh, nice.
for her, that was a big victory. So,
Yeah.
but it just goes to kind of show you that, like, and I talk about this a lot, but I think it's a profound thing when in 1 week your dog eats an insane amount of candy around Halloween, which my dog did, and was completely fine. Just the second time he did it, which was he ate a ring pop, a candy necklace, and one of those like a whole packet of like Mabel had gotten like a Swiss Miss packet of like hot cocoa mix. So he ate that entire thing and didn't even have a soft stool. Didn't even phase
Wow.
him whatsoever. He just was like, all right. Uh
That
he's
was
kind of a
fun.
menace now though. Like after that whole candy thing, we have to like when we leave, we put him in a crate now because he tries to like even non-edible things. He just like will go and like rip a piece of paper up or something. So I'm like, uh, he's kind of funny in that way. But that to me spoke to resilience. And we need dogs to be more resilient. We need dogs that can eat basically anything. We need dogs that people just want to have their dog be healthy and then they want to not focus on this stuff all the time. And that's, I think, what these probiotics do essentially. So the other thing that really interests me here, and by the way, for anyone watching this, if you reach out to us at info@greenjuju.com, you too can have everything I'm looking at right now, the total breakdown of the study, all of the participants, so just an example of that would be like some of the things we talked about with yeah, this So, like with the beta glucuronidase, when we were looking at baseline and final, you could have this information where we break down all of the specific participants, what the levels were at, how they worked. So that is interesting to me. The other really interesting thing about this is one of the things that they mention is gluten sensitivity.
Yeah.
And 44% of the dogs showed a reduction in an immune response to gluten, which is very unexpected and interesting. So that's 21 dogs showing a reduced response, and the average level that it decreased by was 11.2%. So I think the people at the lab thought this was the most interesting thing. And we don't know exactly why. I would posit that it might be because of the more your gut, the more you sort of fix your gut lining, the more you fix, the more you'll have good commensal bacteria, the more you have diversity of bacteria, the healthier your gut is, and you're going to have less of an immune response. But yeah, the average level decreased by 11.2% in 21 dogs. Uh,
That is very interesting, actually.
so not that, a ton of dogs we deal with are eating wheat or anything like that, but there are a lot of dogs that do.
Yeah,
But I think that that speaks to, you know, just general gut health. That, when we look at people who have gut issues and, have celiac and or have gluten sensitivity, there's probably more to that than just gluten. Given all the factors of, gluten from other places doesn't make you sick, or all of the, Roundup and all of that stuff that's on these, foods. I think there's a lot of factors there, and I think the more you fix the gut, the less you'll probably react. At least that's what this showed. So that was very interesting.
well, yeah, I mean, and that's where my mind went too, is that so many people have or say they have gluten sensitivities, but do they really have like Roundup sensitivities, pesticide sensitivities? And if you are decreasing the beta glucuronidase, did I say that right? And
And I had to
you're
say it over and over to get that right. So you're good on that.
and the body is able to process out all of those toxins better, like maybe that it's probably so many different things, but that is kind of where my head went with it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so some of the stuff, even when you start like measuring this kind of stuff, just goes back to the fact that it just goes back to the fact that we even when we have the final numbers, we just don't know. The example I always give of that is like when you make kombucha at home and you start with tea and which has a good amount of caffeine, and then you ferment it and then it has way less caffeine. And we don't exactly know why, other than that it's being metabolized. And so like a lot of times you have the result, and even in some cases when you're measuring the results and the clinical data like this, um, you can sort of you just don't know, which I think is interesting, but also the main thing is that it's happening, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
the main thing people would be excited about there is the result versus that. So, we also looked at, because the study, when we break down the data, the study had dogs of all sizes, less than 20 pounds, some dogs that were 21 to 60 pounds, and then large dogs, which were considered 61 pounds and over. So, it was very consistent between all of those. So the overall percentage improvement when we come to baseline average of the symptoms I mentioned at the beginning versus final, 49.6% improvement for small dogs, 56.9% improvement generally for medium dogs, and then 62% for large dogs. So, you can look at that. You can say, oh, well, it worked best for large dogs, which is great, but they're all pretty similar. They're all in the same range where you're looking at some drastic improvements. And, one of the reasons we created this was because there are a lot of people who don't want to do frozen things. There's a lot of people who don't want to do all these. So we wanted to create something that was like new and food based that people could literally just go, oh, it's a powder, and put it into their stuff. Oop, I got to plug my computer in. Hang on. I'm really
Very
prepared
so
during
prepared.
these. Luckily, it's right behind me. So
And so they changed nothing else. They're eating all different types of foods. They changed nothing else. They just were adding soil every day.
yep.
And I mean, those are pretty significant. I mean, for something that's what, like $1 a day, roughly, I guess, depending on the size of your dog, that's a pretty significant improvement.
Oh, give me 1 second. The
Yeah.
plug behind me does not. That's good. All right, there we go. Yes, I would agree with you. It's like it's a small improvement, and I don't know. I think for most people, uh, in making one change like this, it really just depends on where your priorities are. As
Hmm.
what you want to kind of like spend your money on and that sort of thing. And other interesting thing is there's no reason why this is not a supplement for humans as well. This could very easily just be a human product, because they're from the things. They're from my home raw yogurt culture. They're from my, kombucha, all of those things. It'd be interesting to do a yeast based kind of study.
Hmm.
that I'm saying that. So this I think is really, really interesting. So going back to the weight of dogs, like I think that this when they looked at large dogs, medium dogs, small dogs, I feel like this like exactly played into the stereotypes of these dogs and the what they deal with just generally and what we saw reduction in symptoms. So in large dogs saw the steepest declines in panting and lethargy. So imagine you're thinking about that big dog sitting there panting,
Yeah.
not wanting to move, etc. Medium dogs saw the most consistent reduction in GI symptoms like flatulence and diarrhea. So those dropped over 50% typically. And this is my favorite one. Small dogs, less than 20 pounds, improved significantly but retained the highest final scores for anxiety and excessive licking.
No kidding.
To every small dog. I'm telling you, everybody's like, "My small dog," I don't do as many, like, one-on-one consults now, but, like, everybody's like, "My small dog licks constantly. They have anxiety." So, yeah, I thought it was interesting. The highest final scores for small dogs were in anxiety and excessive licking. So it's cool because we can sort of see, uh, this commonality, but it could help at any size, really. And then they noted that frequent infections reach the lowest final scores across all weight classes, indicating high efficacy regardless of size. So, if your dog is getting frequently infected by things, you're not going to achieve health. So
No.
that is that is an interesting one as well. Um,
So I just have to and I have to say this because this is how my mind works. Is it that small dogs have more anxiety, or is it that people with anxiety are more apt to adopt small dogs?
I think that's a big part of it, honestly. Um, so I mean, I am technically in the medium dog range at 28 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I should actually
I
have,
say this, I say this as a small dog owner.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that that's probably true. I think the people who have big dogs typically are like, ah, they're a dog, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So I should bring Huckleberry at some point. He's here at the co-working space. He's just over in his chair. Being every time I leave to do something like this or a meeting, he gets like completely fawned over. Uh,
Oh, because he's all
People like
alone.
pet him and they surround him. No, it's great. It was like tragically hot here the last 3 days. It was like 87 degrees, which for here is very, very hot. So he couldn't come to work. So he was very sad because he would jump down when I was at the door. And I was like, I know it's sunny out, but you will die if I take you on this 4 mile walk in 87-degree weather. So he's very happy to be here today. He's a great family. So a combination. Oh, so this is a combination improvement occurs when multiple related markers trend positively for the same dog. So here you look at inflammation control. So this is combining calprotectin and beta glucuronidase. 25 dogs, 53% showed improvement in both markers. This combination suggests a reduction in both active intestinal inflammation and bacterial enzyme activity that typically triggers it. So that's when you look at sort of combining that just generally. And I will mention, I didn't even look at this back page. Awesome. When I was preparing, we'll just have to, work through that. So I did mention at the beginning, we're just going to kind of go over some of the things. There's a couple other categories here, but I do think it's interesting to go through this part, which is gut barrier and immune defense, which in terms of measuring zonulin and IgA. So the interesting thing, 7 dogs, which is 15% of the dogs, improved in both. While this was the least common combination for these specific dogs, for the 7 dogs, the supplement effectively addressed what's known as leaky gut, while simultaneously boosting mucosal immunity. So for those 7 dogs out of it essentially supported the gut barrier and also immune defense. And one of those dogs, because they mentioned two specifically, because she might watch this at some point, is Maple Cider, uh, who lives in California, and uh, I'll never forget the day she wrote me on Instagram and she was like, "I'm gonna name my dog Maple." And I was like, "Go for it." It's like I've met some dogs named Maple. I've just never met another kid named Maple. So,
Oh,
um, but so that I thought was interesting as well. And then this back page that there's no highlighted material on. Um, just some other like little facts here for you. Um, Digestive efficiency, 14 dogs showed improved pancreatic enzyme output. So for those 14 dogs are 30%. So looking at that study and showing that 30%. So when paired with the high success rate of glucuronidase reduction, this suggests the supplement is particularly effective at optimizing the breakdown of food. So
hmm.
that's another one, which, we need to get everything we can out of diet, and therefore we need to sort of be able to break down what we have. So just going back to what we talked about earlier, even in the dogs where inflammation rose slightly, so they weren't in that calprotectin reduction, 91% of those dogs still saw a decrease in beta glucuronidase. This suggests the supplement works most consistently on the metabolic microbial level. Again, even if localized inflammation takes longer to subside. Um, so the data also shows that physical health markers move much faster than behavioral ones. Group-wide anxiety remained nearly static, indicating that behavioral modification may require longer duration than the physiological intervention period. So what they were sort of looking at was they were starting to see improvement in more dogs when it comes to the anxiety, but they posited you'd have to do it longer in order to do that. So that's really the breakdown that I wanted to go through today. And I would encourage you guys, if you want more information and all that, to check out to email us, get this information, and kind of take a look at it. They really do break it down in a way that's very digestible. I know that, most people, when they look at like a study, they're like, what is this? And
Yeah.
this is nicely broken down in like presentation style, and they're very thorough over there. So
I know it was a small part, but I actually am very interested in the pancreatic elastase um, results. Dogs, especially dogs with leaky gut or any sort of dysbiosis, they tend to not digest their foods very well and absorb nutrients very well. And I think similarly, dogs with any sort of pancreas issues in general, chronic pancreatitis, it's more difficult for them to be able to actually break down and utilize the nutrients in their food, and they wind up with nutrient deficiencies oftentimes, which are leading to other issues, other symptoms that are popping up. And so that is very beneficial. I mean, all of it together obviously is very beneficial, but that's very interesting to me. And again, like kind of going back to where I was framing this earlier, I do think there is a conversation that needs to be had around the vast usage of kind of mediocre probiotics on the market. And if that's actually helped, I mean, for some dogs, it can help for a period of time, but especially dogs that just don't have a whole lot of diversity to begin with. But over time, having more diversity in what we're supplementing alongside food is really important, and that I think is the conversation that needs to be had moving forward.
yeah, I agree. I think there's a couple points on that, but I agree with you 100% when it comes to firstly that like I think the research itself shows a totality of what the concept was in the very beginning, right? So it's like the whole point of this was how do we diversify the gut as much as possible to affect every part of health, just generally. And that was kind of the opening concept of this, like, oh, dogs that are exposed to more things become healthier. And I think what this showed was the actual mechanics to um, to how that works, like the basic mechanics of like when you introduce all these bacteria, here's the different health markers that we can look at, and here's what's actually happening in the body. So I think that part is relevant, and the other part that's relevant too is like it's exactly what you were talking about in the beginning. Everyone has probiotics and everything, and they're that's at least there's one part of that that's heading in the right direction. Because traditionally in pet food, it was always my dog or cat is sick, therefore they need a probiotic. But what dogs and cats need generally is as much probiotic diversity as possible at all times. And that's what humans need too, in order to just be generally healthy. And so when you look at something like that, you say, we need to shift our mindset away from dogs need this one particular from two things. Number one, dogs don't need it and cats don't need it unless they're sick. That's the first myth, right? If you go back, 20 years, nobody was like, there wasn't very much going on in probiotics in pet food. None of the foods had probiotics, anything like that. So then you're introducing these dogs to sterile environments and, living in our homes, more sterile environments. And you're going like, oh, you know, they're not exposed to very much bacteria at all. So the first part is we need to move away from that. And the second part is we need to, I think what this helps show and illustrate, and I think we've been seeing this in dogs and cats from eating fermented foods and that kind of thing for so many years, is we need to move away from, hey, we did a bunch of research on this one strain and we know that it does X, Y, and Z. It doesn't mean that that can't help in that particular setting, because it really can't. A good example of that would be like Saccharomyces boulardii. We know it's very effective at certain things. But we maybe need to move away from that in general and move towards a base of diversity. And that's what you can do with these probiotics. You can actually you could rotate between these three and still feed other things with bacteria. You could even still add probiotics if you wanted to do that. You could rotate them with other brands like Adored Beast or whatever you're doing, just to get more sort of like diversity in there. And it's that baseline of a bunch of bacteria versus potency, which is, hey, we have 2.5 billion bacteria and it's three strains. Well, if you open farm, you're going to have at least 3,000 strains between that 2.5 billion bacteria. So that's where we want to go. We want diversity over potency. And I think that that fits now with what we're seeing in human research, with what we're seeing in, whatever pet research is happening. But we want to be on the forefront of that and go, well, how do we maximize the fact that we're, doing that?
Well, I appreciate that y'all are doing the research because it takes a lot of time and money and effort and energy, and it's needed, unfortunately, because everybody is skeptical of anything that is good for us these days. It's like, no, where are the studies? Well, like you started out, like, well, my dog is doing better. Do I really need a study?
Mhm.
Some people do. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate everything really that Green Juju has done and is doing. So yeah, I mean, obviously I'm just not going to sit here for another hour and gush over Green Juju, but I do appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on and talking about it and just letting people know that, like, yeah, you're really into putting out these really great products, but you also want people to understand how they're going to move the needle for their animals.
Yeah, it's like the next step. It's the way that we look at that and we say like, how do we reach those people that I think you need information like this as much as you can possibly get it. And then, and I'm excited to see, when more of this is just out in the world in general, how people, perceive that. We're interested in doing more of that generally. We're always working on interesting and weird and non-weird stuff. So there's more to come from Green Juju. There's some really interesting stuff happening right now. So, we often talk about like, let's just slow it down a little bit, take a break, but not take a break, but let's focus on what we have. And then we have ideas and, that's where it is.
Yeah. Well, and I did just get my hands on, for the first time, the new extras line. So we're going to give that a try here very soon. Very excited
Oh,
about
you
that.
did? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's finally like the frozen version is starting to be out and about, and it's a really interesting food. It's like our LID line in that it's formulated differently. But boy, dogs and cats love that food, and huckleberry specifically. I even thought about like, should I just feed him the chicken and turkey, like, and just rotate between them because he likes them so much more? But I didn't arrive at that conclusion when I thought through it. But It's just by far his favorite, and we're getting that across the board. So happy that that's
Hey. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, Billy. I really appreciate it, your time and everything that you're doing. And you're always welcome back.
always happy to be here.
All right, guys, give your pets some extra love from me and from Billy today. And I will talk to you again next week. Before you go, if today's episode got you thinking about what's really going on beneath the surface for your pet, don't forget to check out wildwellnesspet.com. You'll find the Wild Wellness Bioenergetic Test to help uncover hidden stressors, plus a curated apothecary of holistic remedies to support true root cause healing. Visit wildwellnesspet.com to start building a calmer, more vibrant pet from the inside out.